Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our public meeting about our shore project. And thank you all for coming. And if you have an electronic device, such as a cell phone or whatever, please put it on silent so that you do not disturb the meeting. Okay, please be advised that no decisions will be made tonight. This meeting is an opportunity for residents to come and share their questions, thoughts, or concerns. Any feedback received will be considered by our planning department in their future report to council. There are a number of people who wish to speak regarding this project, and everyone will have the opportunity. For this evening, anyone may come to the podium, and they will have 5 minutes to express their questions or concerns. Then staff will respond where possible, or make notes and report back to council. Should anyone need to speak for a second time to identify an issue that has not already been raised or received clarification, they may be allowed another 5 minutes more at the podium. If another person has already commented on the same issue that you have, you do not need to come to the podium to repeat, as all issues will be noted and considered by staff. We will continue in this matter until we have received all comments and will ensure that everyone or anyone who wishes to speak will have an opportunity. Please also be advised that we are live streaming tonight's public meeting on YouTube. Council, town staff, and anyone here in the council chambers may be recorded. Anyone wishing to comment who is watching online but is not here tonight are advised to email any questions or concerns directly to ourshore@innisfil.ca. And again, that's ourshore, all one word, @innisfil.ca, or through the town's website at www.innisfil.ca/forum. This video live streaming is a pilot project, and we apologize for technical difficulties in advance. Once this public meeting is complete, the live streaming will end. The video will continue to be available on YouTube. The link will continue to be available on our website, social media, and from our communications department. So, members of council, are there any disclosures or interests? Okay. If something comes up during the meeting, please bring it to the clerk's attention or myself. The item on the agenda is a proposed new community planning permit official plan amendment and zoning bylaw for shoreline development for the town of Innisfil under the Planning Act. We will now hear from the clerk on how the public notice was provided. Mr. Clerk, please.
Thank you, Worship. Notice of this public meeting was posted on the town page in the Innisfil Examiner on January 20th, 27th, February 3rd, and 10th, 2017, and on the town's website. Planning staff also provided a courtesy mail-out notice to Shoreline Properties on January 26, 2017, as well as outside agencies.
Sorry, Mr. Clerk, has any correspondence been received by the Clerk's Department concerning the proposed amendment?
Yes, we have received 2 items of correspondence. The first from John Aladi of Davies Howe Partners, dated February 14, 2017, on behalf of Mark Libfield of 2715 Purvis Street, Innisfil, expressing his concerns for existing dock and proposed amendments. And the second item from Jordana Stockhammer, dated February 15, 2017, on behalf of the Stockhammers of 1247 Maple Road, stating their objections to the proposed bylaw and the restrictions on seasonal docks.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Michelle Banfield, Policy Planner, who will provide a summary of the planning context of the application. And Michelle, whenever you're ready.
His concerns for existing dock and proposed amendments. And the second item from Jordana Stockhammer, dated February 15, 2017, on behalf of the Stockhammers of 1247 Maple Road, stating their objections to the proposed bylaw and the restrictions on seasonal docks.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Michelle Banfield, Policy Planner, who will provide a summary of the planning context of the application. And Michelle, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Walkup, Deputy Mayor Dolan, all of my members of council, members of the public, and of course my Town of Innisfil colleagues. My name is Michelle, and I am the Policy Planner with the Town of Innisfil that's worked on this project. And I'm happy to be here tonight to tell you a bit about the project and then open the floor as you've talked about. So, I've been asked a lot about, why this project is important to us. And back in 2013, there was a Lake Simcoe Forum that basically brought together Lake Simcoe municipalities, councillors, staff members, those sorts of onshore structures and activities. And at the same time, there's all sorts of different provincial legislation and different documents such as, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan and the implementation of that into local planning documents. And of course, more recently, some court case decisions that take a look really in clarifying roles of municipalities and agencies as it relates to shoreline development and water development. So just wanted to go back to kind of the project goal and what we tried to do at the very start of this. And, certainly it was very much tied to creating a simple process, looking at opportunities for well-planned, ecologically sound development, that's responsive to what our residents want, but at the same time, that also, recognize the importance of Lake Simcoe. So I kind of talk about these 4 guiding principles and in the way that, they certainly the bigger picture ties into our Inspiring Innisfil 2020, but also the guiding principles are things that, I've thought about kind of throughout this process and we all have. And so I'm just going to go over those quickly with you. So the first guiding principle really takes a look at built form and context. It's what it's called. And it's really about fitting development into the greater shoreline and what that looks like. It's obviously unique to each property, and considering we have 53 kilometers of shoreline, it's going to look different kind of no matter where you are. The public realm connects us is the second guiding principle. And I think people generally are interested and understand the concept of public realm as it relates to parks or community buildings, but definitely, want Lake Simcoe is part of our public realm and trying to put that up front. And certainly kind of what happens in and around Lake Simcoe does impact all of us. Sustainable values, and I describe this principle as kind of our, I say it's our time to shine our shoes. Like this is the area that we want the best of the best in terms of if there's anything in terms of low impact developments or new innovative building techniques or sort of anything like this. This is the area, this is our time to shine. And it's not even a matter of just encouraging it. We really want it to be intrinsic in our value and what we think about every day. And then the natural shoreline is the 4th guiding principle. And of course, we've heard so much discussion about the natural shoreline, and I would say that it is very similar to any other concept. Are we talking about public art, or if you're talking about urban design, it means different things to different people. And in the concept of this study, we looked definitely at the natural shoreline as part of all those other guiding principles. But again, I'm recognizing that it does mean different things to different people. And so for some people, a natural Lake Simcoe shoreline includes boathouses, docks, cottages, and for other people, a natural shoreline is just that, completely natural. But really trying to recognize that these, things all mean different things to different people. What's exciting about this project is definitely I keep saying it's policy developed from the ground up. It's, it's not kind of, I've heard a few people say, who wrote this and who did this? And, kind of like, well, it was me, but I keep saying I was the shepherd of it. I wasn't, it wasn't Michelle sitting in a room kind of writing what she wants. It was a really well-shaped task force that, council may be aware, but potentially not everybody else is aware. And you can see all of the different groups that came together 4 times last year in 2016 to kind of shape the draft policies that are here before you tonight, the draft policies that we're all kicking around. And of course, obviously government agencies and different groups all represent different positions. And, we have received kind of some input from the community and industry, but obviously we're going to get more of that tonight. But it is, as I said, it's been really exciting, and the input, has really shaped the documents that we see today. So outreach initiatives, certainly anytime the town does a project, there are certain things, obviously, that we're required to do from the perspective of the Planning Act. And certainly municipalities this day and age, and Innisfil is no different, are using those Planning Act requirements almost as just a starting point. Like, that's not the only thing that we do to involve people. And when I think about outreach for this project, certainly you can kind of see the different events and stuff put up there. But, what I really want to note is that in many cases, we left the building. It wasn't about people always coming to town hall. We were at the library, we were in Lefroy, we were at the farmers market, we were at community events. We partnered with other projects that the town were doing to kind of have that cross function. So if someone came out to find out about trails, well, they'll hear about our shore, and vice versa. So, we've done a lot of things, and certainly also done very targeted groups, to the Heritage Committee and so on and so forth. And even tonight, quite frankly, video streaming, looking at a way to reach other people that may not be here today. And really, this day and age, in terms of outreach and getting input, there's so many ways to do that, not just kind of coming to a public meeting. I say the project has 3 main aspects. So the one aspect is using the community planning permit system as the approval process. So rather than using a zoning bylaw or minor variances or site plan, that concept of using a community planning permit system. It's relatively new in Ontario. It's been used about 10 years or so, which obviously doesn't sound new, but if you consider it in comparison to zoning that's been around for 80 years, 10 years is pretty new. There's certain things about the community planning permit system, though, that make it, particularly relevant to using for a shoreline. And some of these concepts, include, some of that, the definition of development people have heard me talk about, where it's an expanded definition that includes things like site alteration and tree removal, things that wouldn't necessarily need a permit, but really, if you think about in the greater aspect of shoreline development or what happens on the shoreline, it can really have an impact. Definitely shorter approval times, which, again, if you think about things on the shoreline, it's a pretty smaller window, say, for construction, so that's important. The ability for delegated approval for council or staff to take a look at permits. And then the variations and the flexibility built right into the document. Include, some of that, the definition of development people have heard me talk about, where it's an expanded definition that includes things like site alteration and tree removal, things that wouldn't necessarily need a permit, but really, if you think about in the greater aspect of shoreline development or what happens on the shoreline, it can really have an impact. Definitely shorter approval times, which, again, if you think about things on the shoreline, it's a pretty
smaller window, say, for construction, so that's important. The ability for delegated approval for council or staff to take a look at permits. And then the variations and the flexibility built right into the document. You know, certainly people have said, what are these variations? And really what it is, you know, you've got your standards, and if you compare it to, say, a zoning bylaw, if there's a standard, you either meet it or you don't. In the community planning permit system, you do have the ability built right in to say, okay, this is the standard.
Is the draft policy documents. And those are the standards. Those are the standards and variations that I've been saying to people for, you know, months now. These are the standards that we're kicking around. You know, we're different things mean different things to different people, and different people are impacted or interested in different portions of the standards. So I won't go into too many specifics, and I've got an example, you know, a little bit further on in the presentation, but, you know, it's good to kind of think about kind of the standards as, you know, kind of the place to start. And, you know, one of the things I wanted to draw to your attention is also, you know, for example, docks. You know, there's standards, but there's also things that talk about where your dock should be located, you know, to talk about some of these dock conflicts we hear about, or boathouses, and that concept of a bit of a sliding scale of the size based on how big your property is. And in the case of the shoreline buffer area, that concept of if you're looking at your shoreline from left to right, you know, our goal is 75% of that frontage to be maintained in its natural state. And if it's not already, if you come in, we have that discussion about how we can improve it. So, you know, all of these policies would work together. You're not just going to have the boathouse policy apply to you. You're going to have all the policies in the document apply each time you go forward. And then, you know, ultimately, the final component is this approvals process. And I always say to people when I talk to them about the shoreline, there's so much going on. There's so many different types of legislation, and there's so many different types of approvals that you may or may not need. And it's just confusing for people, generally speaking. And so, you know, we've got really great relationships with the Conservation Authority and the Ministry of Natural Resources, and, you know, really taking a look at how we can streamline that process. You know, for our residents alone, it's geography. You know, Ministry of Natural Resources is in Midhurst, and Conservation Authority is in Newmarket. So, you know, the geography is one point of it, but, you know, it really is, you know, kind of having us all in the room at the beginning. So our residents know at the very beginning what they need and where they need to go, as opposed to, you know, getting approval from one group and then finding out later the Ministry of Natural Resources wouldn't approve it anyway, or those sorts of things. So we can't, because of legislative reasons, we can't actually take over those approvals, but we can certainly consolidate them for our residents. So I'm just going to use here an example of on-land boathouses and how I've kind of walked residents and different property owners through the policy. So you probably have seen the display boards, but, you know, definitely it's kind of, you know, where we take a look at, you know, what's your frontage, and then where are those standards, and then, you know, up above we talk, it's hard to see, I know, but talk about some of the other policies, like you can only have one boathouse per lot. You know, you need to protect and enhance the environment. You can't service it with really anything other than electricity. You can't live in there, you know, all those sorts of softer policies. And what some of our residents would have, it's on our website and have been at our open houses, we've taken these display boards, and really all they are illustrations to try to help people understand, rather than, I've also heard a lot of people say, your document's 100 pages. So it really is trying to, you know, based on topics, highlight what people need to know. And we've done on the back of these as handouts, basically what I'm calling a little worksheet. Take a look at your property. Ask yourselves these questions. Talk to me about your plans, and then let us know. And I've had a lot of feedback from residents. It's been fantastic, saying, you know, Michelle, this isn't going to work for me, or, you know, how does this play out? So, as I said, this is just the one example that I'm referencing, but we've done this for in-water boathouses, for docks, and even the site alterations. So, you know, certainly it's been a fantastic and very busy kind of 2017 for me, and, you know, I recognize a lot of people in the audience, and I've had some fantastic discussions. This is just a bit of a summary of kind of some of our main points, and, you know, I always kind of say to people, don't worry if you're not up there. It's kind of, I've still talked to more people today, so, but definitely, you know, we hear a lot about docks, and almost like any topic, you've got the two sides. So some have said it's too short, some have said they're too long. We've heard about boathouses and kind of what people wanting them or not wanting them. We've heard a lot about, use and enjoyment of properties. That's, a phrase that comes into a lot of different pieces of legislation as well. And, that's views are one thing, but, the use and enjoyment of properties, and we've heard a lot about that. Environmental concerns, especially as it relates to boathouses, we've heard a lot about that, or docks, coverage, fish habitat, those sorts of things. And, the short answer is there's not a short answer. And that's, why we always say it's best to look at each property. And when we tie back to some of those community planning permit concepts, the conditions of approval, the ability to monitor, the ability to have some securities tied to these applications, will definitely, we feel, staff feel, certainly will address some of these concerns on an individual basis. And then definitely, some queries about the community planning permits and some small lot implications. A lot of people are really just curious and interested. A lot of people, seem to think that the easier process is a good idea as well. So it's been great. And as I said, this is just really a snapshot, and I know all of you have heard different things as well. So I just want to talk very quickly about this process, this consolidated process. And so we talk very much about this pre-consultation and making it very effective for our residents. And as I said, stopping that loophole, or stopping approvals from one group and then having it not mean anything once you come back to the town or what have you. So having a really meaningful pre-consultation component, having people leave the pre-consultation really knowing what they need to make a submission. When the submission comes in, then we're going to start taking a look at kind of, are all the standards met? Is it something that staff can consider? Is it something that there's some variations required? Staff could still potentially consider it, or is it something that's a little bit bigger that council should look at? And then we have the decision, and then approve or refuse. Certainly one element of the community planning permit system, and what we're doing right this minute, these documents, the official plan amendment and the community planning permit, those documents are under the Planning Act, and they are appealable to the Ontario Municipal Board. Community planning permit decisions are not, and that's one of the components that says right that on the notice. Community planning permit decisions are appealable by the property owner. But again, the concept is that for the planning is kind of put into this document now, and so that most things, if they fall within kind of this range, if they can comply with these conditions, if they can submit the required studies, that they would be okay. And it's not about, and we've said it through this whole process, it's not about taking adjacent property owners out of the process. And in fact, Ministry of Natural Resources requires you to talk to your neighbors and all those sorts of things, signs on the property. There's all the different ways, certainly, that we can include neighbors and everything in the process. And so that's kind of where we are now. So that is what I have for you, and I'm happy to sit down now and open the floor and hear what our residents have to say.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We will now hear from those who have questions or comments regarding the proposed new community planning permit and then bylaw for shoreline development. We will hear first from the public and then from council. I would ask that each person addressing council please come forward and use the microphone. Please state your name, address. Certainly that we can include neighbors and everything in the process. And so that's kind of where we are now. So that Mr. Marvin Geese come up and speak. He has 5 people that he's representing, and then we will proceed with others that are coming after. Mr. Geese, whenever you're ready.
Thank you.
We will now hear from those who have questions or comments regarding the proposed new community planning permit and then bylaw for shoreline development. We will hear first from the public and then from council. I would ask that each person addressing council please come forward and use the microphone. Please state your name, address, and postal code for the record. First of all, I'm going to ask that Mr. Marvin Geese come up and speak. He has 5 people that he's representing, and then we will proceed with others that are coming after. Mr. Geese, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, Your Worship, I'd like to know how many people here this evening own property on the lake? If you could take a poll, I'd appreciate it. Good. That's great. Okay, good. Alrighty. First of all, I do represent 5 Shoreline residents, and I have delivered their names and addresses and telephone numbers and all the communication necessary to clerk services. Now, I have received many phone calls over the last number of months with regard to the development process. Firstly, I would like to thank Tim Kane and Michelle Banfield for their communication throughout this entire process. It has not been a monologue, it's been a dialogue, and they've been extremely receptive, and I thank you for that. Now, people have called me. Why have they called me? They've said, Marvin, why is the town of Innisfil going into the permit business for boats, for rafts, for boat lifts, swim platforms? Don't they have something better to do? Why are they going into that business? And Michelle mentioned in her deputation that there was a court case. And I think all of us in here should know about this court case, and I'll make it very briefly, the resume of it. And the facts are this. It's a Superior Court of Justice case heard a year and a half ago by Mr. Justice Perel. And what happened, Mr. Hart owned a cottage on a small lake in the Kawarthas. And he decided he wanted a boathouse and a dock. So he designed a floating boathouse and a dock, and he went to the local municipality, and they said, well, since it's floating and since it's on Crown land, we have no jurisdiction under the Municipal Act nor under the Planning Act. So then Mr. Hart went to the M&R and said, I want to build this floating boathouse. And they said, well, since you're not anchored to the bottom of the lake, you've tethered 2 steel poles or wires to the shoreline above the high water mark, you're not putting anything down into the bottom of the lake. So therefore, the free use policy that the M&R has says you don't need a permit. So Mr. Hart built his boathouse and he built his dock. And one morning, Mr. Glassbell, his neighbor, woke up and there was this boathouse and dock next door. And Mr. Glassbell was not very happy. So he ran around to all the bodies, the municipality, and to the M&R and said, what did you do to me? And they said, we have no jurisdiction here. This is legal. So Mr. Glassbell was then very upset, and he went to court. And luckily for him, he obtained a judge who was extremely sympathetic. And the judge asked, the main issue is, what rule of law governs docks, boathouses, boat lifts on lakes? What is the rule of law? Who has jurisdiction? So Mr. Justice Perel, after hearing the case, said, the town, under the Municipal Act, has the authority to pass bylaws. And under the Planning Act, it has jurisdiction to plan uses. And therefore, the municipality should be planning for the use of the lake, up to the middle of the lake, if it's Lake Simcoe, or if it's a small lake, the entire lake. So the town does have jurisdiction. And M&R, you've made a big mistake. Your 15 square meters of free use that they interpreted being 15 meters of pylons into the lake is wrong. It's the actual deck size. If it's in excess of 15 square meters, you need a permit. Then the judge under the building said, under the building code, the chief building officer should be inspecting the building. So Mr. Glassbell, after getting this judgment, and the judgment was, as I just said, the town has jurisdiction, M&R has jurisdiction, the Conservation Authority has jurisdiction, and the Chief Building Officer has jurisdiction. So therefore, everybody in all other municipalities, not just Innisfil, are now going into the business of regulating what's on the lake. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're doing the development permit. But my concern right now is, one, and I'll go into it a touch further, that I think, notwithstanding that we've had 4 public meetings and that this is being televised, and notices have gone out to the residents, the town still has jurisdiction, notwithstanding this bylaw has not been passed, to regulate the shoreline. You have your bylaws in place. The MNR, as of January the 1st, has passed and is keeping contact with all property owners, and you must have a building permit from the MNR. And these are the books and these are the applications. So they're the ones who right now, if you want to build a dock or a boathouse, you have to deal with the MNR. Okay, so there are controls in place, and you're not being prejudiced in any way. And as a matter of fact, if someone wants to build something on the lake more than what's prescribed in your bylaw, you have the Committee of Adjustment to do what it wants to do. So I know that your interim control bylaw in the next few months is coming to an end, and that interim control law prohibited building on 25 lots on the Lake Simcoe shoreline. You still have the right to control development on those 25 lots, notwithstanding that this whole process may not have been passed. So you are not being prejudiced in any way whatsoever. Now, some of the specifics and concern of my clients is really the Sixth Great Lake. It is a large lake. And when we reviewed the terms and conditions and the examples of the bylaw, we note that it really doesn't fit Lake Simcoe, because Lake Simcoe is a large water body, and on such a large water body, larger boats are generally required. Upon review of the standards that have been established for boathouses, it appears these standards are reflective of those of smaller lakes. I mean, people ask me, Marvin, what kind of boat should I have for Lake Simcoe? And I normally say a 23-foot bow rider. Okay, that's safe. If you can afford something bigger, do it. Canoeing is not the best on this lake, nor kayaking, unless it's first thing in the morning. So when it comes to boat sizes, or boathouse sizes, we need larger boathouses. The bylaw establishes categories that apply to most lots, but there is no category that deals with lots that have a frontage of over 90 meters. We think that there needs to be another category that provides for larger structures on those lots. A 3.5 meter height is not high enough to allow for boats to be elevated for winter storage. On Georgian Bay boathouses, height is measured from the top of the dock to the midpoint beneath the peak and the eaves, and a 4-meter height is permitted. The maximum permitted projection of 10 meters for boathouses would not allow for the larger boats that we have on the lake to be stored in one's own boathouse. In some instances, it is better to have a boathouse off of the shore than abutting the shore. The projection limit in the bylaw would force boathouses to be against the shore. Now, I have one client that I was here a couple months ago who has concern with the length of docks, the width of docks, the excessive use of the docks, and I'm sure that this bylaw will look to the location of the docks and whether that temporary dock impedes your own road ends. All right, and that's very important. I have one client who's very concerned that the bylaw proposed does not allow for severances on private roads. And for many of you on council, you don't recall when I was here a number of years ago on behalf of Mr. Gerald Scheer, who owned property on the Longwood Road. Mr. Scheer owns several hundred feet. I think it was in excess of about 500 feet of shoreline, and he wanted a severance, and the town said no, but the OMB said yes. So I would ask that you review this bylaw, that under certain circumstances, that severances on private roads be allowed. Please note that the provincial policy statement with regard to intensification, the growth plan supports that type of use.
Mr. Geist, can you sort of wrap it up here?
I will finish. I have one page left, sir. My main concern at the present time is that there are 53 kilometers of shoreline. There are 1,295 shoreline property owners, and notwithstanding that the town, through its notices, has done an admirable job, I would highly recommend that there be another statutory public meeting after May the 24th. For those people who are on vacation in Florida, for our snowbirds. At the previous meetings that I went to in Lefroy, there were 11 cottagers who were there. Those 11 cottagers, 5 of which I brought to the meeting. I mean, we have a decent representative here tonight, and that's why I asked the question, but we have 1,295 cottagers, and they deserve to be here and to listen to what's happening. Most of them are away. I could list dozens of my neighbors along the shoreline who are not here, and they deserve the right to have input. I suggest to you that we, the cottagers, are your largest tax resource in the town. We are your largest industry in this town, and we should be heard. So in conclusion, I thank the town and its staff for communicating with us in the way it did, but I would ask that you delay the implementation of any zoning bylaw to a later date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. I noticed Michelle and Mr. Kane making notes all the time over there, so. Yes, sir. You want to come forward and state your name and address, please? And whenever you're ready, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Give me a moment to shuffle paper. That gentleman packed an awful lot of useful information into 5 minutes, didn't he? Well, the time flew by. My name is Stuart Marwick, and I am involved with a family property at Degrassi Point on the third line. Been in my wife's family for 130 years, and I have my personal connections for 50 years. I can give my address later. That is to say, the mailing address you requested. I would like to say that I'm representing here today the Innisfil District Association, IDA. Our president is out of the country, and he asked me as vice president if I would speak in his stead. The town clerk, I believe now, certainly the assistant town clerk knows that I gave him 2 copies of a submission that's been prepared by our organization. So I'm not proposing to read that or anything, but I do want to pick up a couple of points. With regard to the first speaker, and I am sincere, but it was very interesting what he had to say, and I think I speak for my organization wholeheartedly in his recommendation, his plea, that you slow this process down. A whole raft, I think that's a good word considering we're talking about lakes, a whole raft of issues has surfaced despite the good work of the planning people and the public meetings and so on. Questions that arise that we don't have answers for, ideas that people have that perhaps still haven't been heard as they haven't come forward. I don't know about the snowbirds, but even people in the room here. And I implore you to delay this process. Now, I realize you're between a rock and a hard place because you're governed by an interim bylaw, which I believe is actually, I thought, had already expired, but I may be wrong on that point. And my understanding is you don't have a lot of leeway to create a new one, and you don't have any leeway to modify the present one, expired or not. So I don't know what you would do to slow it down, but I wish to heck that you would do that. From our point of view, I want to emphasize a lot of people here are cottagers, and I think the question was who were on the lake. I'm not sure about that, if everyone's on the lake, but it doesn't matter. Our organization, for example, does not merely represent people who are fortunate enough to have property on the lake. We're concerned more broadly with all of the planning activities of the town of Innisfil, which I think we should all recognize is one of the fastest growing areas in the entire country. And you, council, and your staff are doing your best to keep up with the incredible demands that are placed upon you. And I don't know what your learning curve is or how you hope to cope with everything, but so far I think you're doing your best, and we want to encourage you to do that. With regard to the lake itself, so we are concerned with the entire town, and we want to make the ecological point that if the lake is healthy, the town is going to be healthy for a whole lot of reasons that I'm not having time to go into. So we're not merely concerned with the health of the lake, but with the health and the future of the entire town. Now, sorry, let me just get back onto my track. Yes, the lake is not healthy. So to boil down the concerns of the decisions that you need to make as a council and that the planners need to wrestle with, really there are at least three principal ideas, and these are contained in our submission as well. Number one, does any proposed activity, is it going to be injurious to the health of the lake? Secondly, is it any proposed change, development, building, whatever it may be, is it going to affect efforts that are underway to improve the health of the lake? And thirdly, will any developments on the shoreline in particular impede people's enjoyment of their property and interfere with what's called in planning terms the viewscape? Do you want to look out at a lake that is filled with 1,500 moorings? And if you laugh and think that's funny, no. We have a new marina opening up in the well-known Friday Harbor project, which has well over 1,000 slips, new slips. So we're looking at a lot of vessels. Lake Simcoe is shallow in most of its shoreline. And somebody, and here's where I differ with the previous speaker, seemed to be saying, got a big lake, therefore should have a big boat. Well, why not the Queen Mary? You know, it's a big boat. So how big a boat? But the issue should not be, I've got a lot of money, I can pay for a big boat, I'm buying a cottage, you're not allowed to have boathouses, I'm going to make sure that I can put my boat where I bloody want it. Whether or not that's good for the health of the lake, remembering the previous 3 points. And we don't see really enough rigorous attention given in what's been the good work done so far that gives us some kind of a baseline as to what is permitted and what will never be permitted, ever. And bigness is a big part of it. And so I want to emphasize that point. Now I'm going to skip and say, I was taken recently by the death of Rob Stewart. Many of you will know this is a Toronto documentary filmmaker who drowned while doing underwater filming off the coast of Florida 2-3 weeks ago. And he was quite a spokesman for the kinds of issues that I'm talking about. And I wanted to quote something that he had said some years ago, but basically reminding us all that the future is very murky with regards to water everywhere in the world. And we can't escape that. And are we going to be contributors to screwing things up, or are we going to be contributors to making them better? And the coda to those kinds of remarks that Rob Stewart was all about is this. These are our thoughts. If you really love Lake Simcoe and you want to be part of the huge effort that's required to nurse it back to health, you will very, very carefully consider before undertaking any actions tonight, now, or at any time that will stand in the way of our achieving that goal. This is not simply about docks or boats. It's about the survival of our lake and ultimately us. We are looking globally at a very short time frame. What makes some people think in this town that it's a good idea to simply go bigger and bigger and to make any kinds of alterations that you think are appropriate? And I will finish with this question. I'm not familiar with all of the details, but I believe that in recent years there have been a couple of cases of people who not only wish to have very large and stable and concrete and so forth docks and the suitable, equal-sized boathouses, and even when the town indicated they didn't think it was appropriate, went ahead and did it anyway. And I understand that a fine was applied by some level of government and paid. Fine, but those facilities that were built, to the best of my knowledge, are still there. Why are they still there? Is it that you as a town don't have the authority to insist and, if necessary, send in the bulldozers and rip it all out? Or what? I don't know the answer, but I have the feeling that you're only part way down the road with the good work that's been done so far that we're talking about here tonight, and we implore you to slow down the process. It's in everybody's long-term interest to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to have the lady in red, and then you can be next. Ma'am, please.
Good evening.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Carla Smiterly, and I'm at 2267 Crystal Beach Road. I'm speaking on my behalf, even though I am a part of the IDA. So as you know, the waterfront is an important asset to the town of Innisfil and its residents. It also represents a significant opportunity for the future and well-being of our community, which must be carefully balanced with preservation, environmental protection, and public safety. When the balance is lost, it can have an unintended and potentially serious consequences for the town and the community. These are the unintended consequences of the decisions we make, which are likely not found in any environmental study, coastal engineering report, or planning document, and pressure, basically, these consequences put on the town, which lead to reactionary decisions like the one that we're facing now, and then obviously fractured turnouts. I'm raising this issue with Council because the direct relationship between increased lake protection and a universal blanket development permit system, which is designed to promote development over water, reward increased building heights, and intensification, is unclear as it stands today. The stark contrast continues throughout the proposed bylaw, as it suggests the permits required to build a fence which cannot be taller than 3 feet within 20 feet of the water's edge but a boathouse next to it can be anywhere from 20 feet up to 20 feet high, 10 feet, up to 20 feet high and 3 feet into the water. It's completely reasonable, if frankly expected, for the town to introduce measures to ensure protection of our shoreline. The proposed community permit system represents a significant decision for the town, with potentially even larger impacts, because it's not only difficult to reverse if it's not working, but it also removes the ability for communities to appeal decisions made. Additionally, because of Bill 73, it introduces a 5-year prohibition period whereby no person may apply or request an amendment to the community planning permit bylaw or the official plan unless council passes a resolution, which sounds simple, but it isn't. For these reasons, it's crucial that, firstly, the community agrees with implementing this system, and secondly, that it's done right. The shoreline management document includes unclear and ambiguous language around how exactly the adequate protection of the shoreline would be achieved using this community planning system. The associated bylaw, although mirroring in many ways the current zoning bylaw, it contains some large, broad stroke built-in variations and discretionary decision-making left mostly to town staff. This puts a lot of power in the hands of planning staff in spite of their qualifications and abilities. There's definitely more vulnerability to making mistakes, particularly as a new system. What happens if staff allow excessive building based on a flawed study? The community would have no opportunity to make their argument before it was approved. This would almost certainly lead to significant unintended consequences for the community, Lake Simcoe, and the town. To address this concern, you might consider introducing a design review panel or delegate the decision about permits to a citizen planning advisory committee. Additionally, the universal approach to the permit application process and permit issuance goes overboard for small-scale things like fences, seasonal docks, lifts, or small sheds, for example. It states that applications for a community planning permit will comply with the complete application submission requirements for a community planning permit identified in Schedule 1 of Ontario Regulation 173-16. This is an onerous list of requirements that appears to be fitting for major invasive activities like permanent docks or boathouses. Please consider a revision to this, adding some kind of a simpler process, or at the very least, some minimums which would exempt certain things from permit applications. Alternatively, the council could just consider amending the current zoning bylaw to further enhance rules around development at the shoreline, and then pass a bylaw turning a committee of adjustments into a planning advisory committee. I also do have a question, and that is with respect to Bill 27 that is currently going to receive some input and deals with the burden of regulatory issues or on businesses, as well as an amendments and repeals. Within that bill, there is a provision related to public lands, which basically states that no permit is required to erect anything on a public land. So I'd like to find out how this permit system deals with that coming regulation.
Thank you.
Tracy Gross.
Whenever you're ready.
Tracy Gross, 3517 Crescent Harbor Road. I like this. Did a good job.
Can you repeat your address again, please?
17 Crescent Harbor Road. It's pretty good. I have some personal concerns and then some public concerns. The road we live on is, it's grown immensely over the last 20 years. It's become completely ostentatious and ridiculous. We have road meetings yearly for our road. And at our road meetings, the last one we had, a gentleman had built something, knowing full well that it was beyond his permit. And then the whole entire group of people, to my outrage, said, oh, we just do what we want and ask for forgiveness later. They'll give us a variance. And I was outraged. That being said, this is the kind of people that want their great big boathouses, and they're willing to do anything to get them, period. And it's disturbing because it's going to destroy the lake, it's going to destroy the habitat. And there's a notice here in number 10 in the planning about helicopter pads. It's a Transport Canada is the one who would regulate that. Who else would regulate that? The MNR must have something to say about a helicopter pad being placed in the middle of the lake. They must. Does anybody know?
I can confirm that the federal guidelines prevent local jurisdiction over those types of facilities. Whether the province has any jurisdiction, that's something we have to follow up and see with MNR.
Thank you. The community planning permit, it's all great. I like it. It could be do a little more for the environment as far as I'm concerned. And I'm wondering, what does community benefit mean? Community benefit as in they can sell their land and put up a high-rise, and you can benefit tax-wise by having so many people living in one structure? Or is it community benefit, it really does benefit the community? Putting in parks, putting in trees, maybe making the traffic not so bad. It took me 3.5 hours to get here. We've had to commute to here. I'd like to ask that variances and amendments, there would not be any for 5 years. A moratorium on them completely. You're putting all these rules in place. Why give somebody the leeway to maybe possibly change them? And those are just basically our concerns. And I know that since 1990, a family member of ours with Ducks Unlimited has been trying to restore the lake to what it should be. And it seems like we're actually destroying it again. Ducks Unlimited has been trying since 1990 to balance the ecosystem of the lake. And now we're going through all of this nonsense with the bigger boats and people just needing to be bigger and better and faster. At the cost of what? What are we going to lose when all this happens? Thanks.
Yes.
Good evening. I actually emailed a PowerPoint. I don't know if that's available. My name is Lindsay Histrop. I'm a permanent resident in Toronto. My Innisfil residence is 3565 Innisfil Beach Road, and Innisfil, yeah, Crescent Harbor Road. Sorry, I think I'm a little nervous. So I will, first I'll start by saying I am very personally involved in this issue because unlike many of us who it may be theoretical at this point, for me it's happening in terms of what my neighbor is doing. So I'm not attacking my neighbor in this because it's a much bigger issue than me and my neighbor and what's going on. And as many people have already said, we're very concerned about the ecology of the lake and the future of it. And I want to compliment the work that's been done because I really do appreciate how much work has gone in to this whole R-Sharp plan and writing all these these new proposed rules. But again, I think we have to start with the lake in terms of what's important. And, you know, I'm troubled because there's a lot of talk about a natural shoreline, and as Ms. Banfield said, everybody sees that as a different thing. But for me, a natural shoreline means an ecologically sound shoreline. So my family has been in Innisfil as a cottage for 105 years, continuously. First at Cedar Mount, and then more recently Crescent Harbor. Not really recent, it's been 85 years that we've been on this property. And I can work this, right? Yeah. So this is a view from our front lawn, and we're obviously really privileged to have this property, and that my grandfather had the foresight to purchase it 85 years ago. And this is what's happened. Our neighbor, and without MNR requiring any notice to us, so they do not actually require the neighbor to be involved at all. Our neighbor was able to build this structure, and it is quite formidable. It's about 1,100 square feet, and it's about the size of this area where I stand here looking forward to you and out to H-Wall. And it's got approval as docks, but it's actually a foundation for a boathouse. So this is my very amateurish artist concept of what it's going to be like when the proposed boathouse goes in. And I want to make the point that this is about 2,100 square feet, which is exactly the possible size under the proposed plans that could be approved with council. So this would be the 50% increase of the normal permitted overwater boathouse. And this is sort of a aerial view of the property, and you can see it sitting out there. In fact, it's so big that boaters have stopped us and asked if it was Friday Harbor. I expect when Friday Harbor sees this that they'll want to do something like this. So, you know, as we sit and on our dock, and we look at a wall of presently a foundation, but, you know, maybe soon to be a boathouse. We noticed some changes, and I thought I would just share them with you because everybody's concerned about the ecology. We're actually noticing issues. So this was hard clay and rock under this area and in front of our beach, and it is already, or maybe from the construction, we don't know what, turned to muck. So if we walk a little bit towards this marina, I'll call it, we sink into our ankles in muck. We never had that before. We've always, even before water shoes, we had to wear running shoes because the rocks were so hard on our feet. We've watched the schools of fish literally swim under our dock, which is a dock in the box, not to advertise them, but you can see through it. They swim under our dock and make a sharp right turn and swim around this infill. I don't know what it means. I just see it happening. We see the waves, which hit a big shoal, which is on this slide, and they get completely stopped. They go around the side, and then there's all these cross waves that wash up against our shoreline, and I don't even know what they're doing, but the physics of it is mind-boggling. It also deposits debris, so, you know, when there's seaweed from what my grandfather used to call Muddy River kind of coming up on a rough day, it drops it all off. Our cottage in this picture is just to the left of this infill, and so it drops it off in front of our beach. This is just in one season, because this went in 2016. we can no longer take our canoe and paddle it north without going all the way around this thing. So if it's a little bit choppy or a little bit windy, we just don't go in that direction. Safety is an issue. We've put out swimming buoys and a dock so that the boats of our neighbors can't enter their marina in front of our swimming area. And then the 24-hour lighting, because of course it's a danger to boats at night, now lights up the water all around it. So, you know, the night view is definitely affected. And so I wonder what a natural shore is. And again, I apologize for my bad art. My daughter's a professional artist. She'd be mortified at this. But is that a natural shore where the shoreline itself is preserved and we do all the things we have to do with the vegetation and we plant the right plants, but in front of the shoreline there's all these permanent overwater boathouses? Or is this a natural shore where, you know, we've just echoed everything that the neighbor did, because in fact M&R, who were, I'm sorry, very irresponsible, told us that our neighbor didn't need a permit for his docks and we could go ahead and build the same thing without a permit. So this is Lake Washington, and previously my husband provided our council members with a scientific article commissioned by the Department of Ecology for the state of Washington. And what Washington has found is that these permanent overwater structures are affecting the salmon population. And if you think that salmon isn't an issue in Lake Simcoe, the Lake Simcoe whitefish are a member of the salmon species. I have some written notes. All the issues that I see personally are in those notes, and in the interest of time, I won't go through all of it. But there's not just ecology, there's safety issues that concern me. Seasonal docks are one thing, so I appreciate people have shallow water. They need to go way out with their seasonal dock. But a permanent dock that goes out up to 131 feet in the water, I see as a hazard. And it's not just in the summer, because in the wintertime, we have these skidoos. I'm not crazy about them, but I respect them. And they scream along the shoreline in front of the cottage residences. And I understand that on February 6th, there was a terrible accident. And there was drinking involved, but then my experience with skidoos screaming along the shore at night, there usually is drinking involved. But 2 people, unfortunately, hit a permanent dock and ended up in hospital. So these are just issues to please keep in mind. And I'll wrap up with some of these wonderful photos that I found on the internet. Permanent docks and piers and boathouses get abandoned, but they're on Crown land. So I am a lawyer, but I have no idea who's responsible for removing or fixing these things. And if somebody decides to go walk out on it and falls and hurts themselves, I'm not sure, but I think they would sue the Ontario government, in our case, the town of Innisfil, and if they could figure out who built it in the first place, they'd probably sue them as well. There's an abandoned boathouse in BC. I love this one. This is Maryland. But this is the Holland River, where you can see there's a permanent dock there that's kind of cockeyed now and falling apart. And maybe in Lake Simcoe, because it's so rough and the ice in the winter is so just destructive, everybody will do as my neighbor did, which is steel and cement piers. But when the top goes off of them, the cement piers just stay there forever. So this is why I'm concerned. It's why I'm here tonight. I have disclosed that obviously I'm very personally involved in this. I obviously don't want my neighbor to build a boathouse that's going to block my view north forever. So if I sit on my dock, I'll be looking at that wall. But there's greater concerns here than just me and my 85-year-old property. And I feel as a community we bear a very heavy burden, and other people have said that tonight. But we need to do our best to do no harm. And if there's any doubt whatsoever that permanent structures over Lake Simcoe are going to cause harm to the ecology, then again, I think everybody has to stop, back up, get some research done. The article that I found, and actually it's cited in the Our Shore materials published on the town's website, it's cited as one of the authorities, speaks to the Lake Washington experience. I would like to see a town of Innisfil retain or engage a marine biologist to look at Lake Simcoe in particular. There is a Lake Simcoe Scientific Committee. There is a gentleman on that committee who is a marine biologist. I don't know what is involved and what the cost would be, but as a resident, I would be happy to help fundraise to commission a study like that would be specific to our lake. It's also important, and Ms. Banfield has acknowledged this very fairly, to balance the interests of everybody. We've heard about people who want big boats because they have big properties, but if the big property is beside, like mine, a small property, then there's an effect of that. People don't put their huge boathouses right in the front, in the middle of their properties, because they don't want to look at them. They generally put them off to the side. So, they're not looking out their beautiful picture windows at their boathouse. And also, finally, I just wanted to talk as well about preserving Innisfil's culture and heritage, because it's very special, I think, what we've got here. And I am very concerned. My very amateurish pictures don't really tell a fair story of what it might look like if everybody built these boathouses. But I think it's important that the culture and heritage also be paramount. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have hard copies of this if they're needed.
Gentleman over there in the blue shirt, and then the gentleman here in the front. Whenever you're ready, sir.
My name is Larry Stockhammer. I'm a resident at 1247 Maple Road in the town of Innisfil, L0L 1C0. Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor, councilors, fellow residents. My opposition to the proposed bylaw, first of all, is not just my own, but is that of many of my neighbors that I've spoken to. And I want to thank Michelle Banfield for hosting a parlor meeting at one of the residents' home recently to solicit various opinions of, people who reside on the waterfront. So our objection, and I'm speaking for myself and, many of our neighbors, to the proposed bylaw focuses primarily on the inclusion of the docks in the plan in the first place. Specifically, the proposed bylaw as it relates to the imposition of any restrictions and requirements on the configuration as to the length of seasonal docks, seasonal ramps, boat lifts, seasonal marine railways, etc. The proposed restrictions being contemplated by the town of Innisfil will substantially and negatively affect the use and enjoyment of residents and cottagers alike along the shoreline, and in particular, residents who install temporary and seasonal docks in front of their property in order to access and operate boats from their residences and cottages. The proposed restrictions on the length of seasonal docks does not take into account the tangible issues relating to properties fronting Lake Simcoe. For instance, the sand bed and water depth along the waterfront varies and is not constant, not only from bay to bay, but from property to property within the same bay. Implementing restrictions on seasonal docks that are not within navigational waters is neither realistic or reasonable. the residents required the continuous use and enjoyment of their existing seasonal dock in order to access their boat throughout the boating season. The exact specifications of their dock may need to change from time to time, and from year to year, in fact, depending on the water levels. And the water levels is a very serious issue, of course, in Lake Simcoe, as we all know. So we object to the inclusion of seasonal docks in the proposed bylaw for the following reasons. Number one, seasonal docks are by their definition seasonal. They are just temporary structures. And for the most part, they're only in use for 12 to 16 weeks a year. Seasonal docks do not affect the ecological development of the waterfront. Seasonal docks do not harmfully alter the fish habitat. Seasonal docks do not impede the flow of water in the lake. Most seasonal docks typically are, for the most part, sitting on poles and are skinny structures, so to speak. Seasonal docks are not within navigational water, so they don't constitute a navigational hazard. Seasonal docks require a minimum of, for the most part, of 3 feet of water to accommodate an average boat to allow it to operate during the course of the season. So therefore, imposing blanket length limits on seasonal docks does not take into consideration the various water depths along the shoreline, and in particular the shallow depths along some of the lake that necessitate longer docks in the first place. Imposing any lengths whatsoever on seasonal docks does not take into account or consideration any of the shifting of the sandbars that appear during the boating season and change from year to year, which may necessitate longer docks. The water depth along the shoreline of Lake Simcoe drops significantly from May to September as a result of water being diverted from our precious Lake Simcoe to Georgian Bay through the Trent-Severn Waterway, thereby affecting directly the length requirements of seasonal docks. The water depth along the shoreline in the bay where we reside, in fact, drops between 1 and 2 feet between May and September, depending on the year, thereby affecting the length requirements of seasonal docks in our bay. I would be amenable to the implementation of the proposed bylaw as long as it does not impose any restrictions and requirements on seasonal docks. But I agree with earlier speakers tonight who encourage you to slow down the process and ensure that you consider the many reasons and important issues that are being raised by the residents here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman in the gray sweater. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Yes. My name is Tim Clark, and I'm a cottager at 26 Gooch Park Drive, and have been lucky enough to be there for about 40 years, having married into the cottage. I'd just like to echo pretty well what everybody has said tonight and give you a simple case example. Ms. Hislop has done a wonderful job of doing the same thing, but I'd just like to talk about onshore boathouses and cottages that are built very close to the shore. Decades ago, before I even came on the scene at Big Bay Point, the neighbor to the south of us built a cottage about 2 paces away from the shoreline. And then that cottage was torn down and rebuilt again with great foundations and a basement and all that sort of stuff. And some concrete was laid along the shore, just a little bit out into the water, probably about 1 foot or so, and that was very helpful for him to get his boat out on the water. Once this was done, there were very significant things, as far as we were concerned, that happened to our property. This structure was sitting on the shore, and all of a sudden, we're like this. Or as Hislop pointed out, we had a blinder on our one side. This nice view is gone, partly there, because people build their structures on the sides of their property. They don't build them in the middle of their property. They don't usually put their temporary docks in the middle of their property, although for some reason we have done that for ourselves. The beach that was on our property disappeared. Because of the way the ice moves in and out every year and tears things apart and fixes it up, the bottom structure changed, such that the fact that now the bottom goes up right opposite this area. And very close to the property, moving out a little bit further, is a current that runs along the bay and bumps into another person's property. And that current carries the local minnow population that's there all the time. And this attracts a tremendous number of birds all year long, different types of birds, birds coming in from the north dropping by because it's a great place to feed, as I'm sure there are many other places along the shores of Lake Simcoe that these birds come to. So I'm concerned about the fact that my neighbor on the other side may want to do the same thing, or may want to put a boathouse into his property. He already has a rail that puts his boat in and out, and his dock is on that side of the property, on our side of the property. You know, there's nothing illegal about what he's doing at the moment because that's the way everybody does it. I'm concerned that he'll put a boathouse there. I know he's not going to, but let's say he sells and somebody else puts a boathouse there. You have to think also about the long term here. When someone puts a structure in that's fixed in the water or right on the edge of the water, and they sell their cottage, the next person's going to think, well, I can build on that, just the way often people build on foundations when they take down a cottage. They build on a foundation. So I just want everybody to think in the long term about this and realize that there will be impact on the lake, and the lake is very important to us. And I have one other question. Under the bylaw, when you get this in place, will you have the authority to tell someone, such as the person who's built this dock in front of Ms. Hislop's property, to tear it down? What will the authority be? What instruments will you have in place to make this possible to enforce this bylaw? Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that wants to come up and speak on behalf? Yes, ma'am. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Selig, and I reside at 1545 Houston Avenue only for the summer. I never knew about any of this going on until I got the mailing that came to my home address just a few weeks ago. Otherwise, I would have attended probably earlier. I know where I am, there's a lot of seasonal owners. Hardly anyone lives on our road year-round. A lot of those people are probably away and not able to come to this at this time. I don't have a huge presentation like all the rest of the people. I'm just going to touch on a few things that I have not heard. We were very concerned about the fence height, as well as only being 3 feet. Most of our neighbors have 6-foot fences, and if you happen to be not blessed with a good neighbor, sometimes you need that 6-foot fence to block the view next door. Nothing was ever said about, we have a very unusual situation where we have water at the front and side of our property. We are on a point. We therefore have a small bay between us and our neighbor, which unfortunately collects a lot of sludge. You do have some notes about vegetation in the lake. This is not really cleaning seaweed, as I see machinery do on the far side of the lake, where they haul it away in dump trucks and the machines pick it out. This is more decayed leaves, seaweed, zebra mussel shells, everything like this. I want to know if there's any provisions for this. We have a brand new neighbor this last year. The previous neighbors every year brought a truck down, cleaned several times, several truckloads of this sludge away and took it to their farm. The new neighbor just now rakes it out of the lake and piles up in a huge pile right beside our lot line on the beach. I want to know if there's any provisions to stop people from doing this, since this is kind of the health of the lake. I'd asked them to remove it. I think the town did ask them to remove it. They said they had removed it, but it was still there. And in the fall, another neighbor went with 2 shovels and shoveled it all back into the lake. I'm not sure that's such a good thing for the lake. We personally have 2 docks. Just purchased 2 Sea-Doos, which have lifts that are approximately 6 feet across. Now, I don't know with the new setbacks. We do have a boathouse, which is only approximately 4 feet from our lot line. Our neighbors to the south also have a boathouse right beside ours, probably closer, maybe 3 feet. And they were originally going to build almost right on the lot line, and I had to come to council to have them move it over to 3 feet. They poured the concrete footings, and they're still there empty. So does that mean if we want to tear down our boathouse of 45 years, that we now have to move 5 meters over, or can we rebuild it? Or is it going to be in the middle of our property? That's a concern for us. Also, the docks, our neighbors have 3 docks. One is strictly for housing boats, and they sometimes have 2 or 3 on either side of the dock. They have another dock for sitting and another dock for their rental properties. So this 5-meter setback for docks, does that also include the boat lifts or Sea-Doo lifts that may be on the side of it? Otherwise, that's going to have to move them even over more, right? If you're trying to keep the side of our boathouse has a railway that goes into it. And it's not that large. We have a smaller boat, but it's obviously closer than 5 meters to the lot line. My problem, because of our situation, I want to know who's going to enforce these laws. We've been blessed with a right-of-way over our property. So we have several neighbors that have a right to come down across our property. And for the last 5 years, we've been in court fighting these people over our right-of-way. It's cost us thousands of dollars, numerous horrible nights not sleeping, vandalism to our property, and we just received our decision that we've won. But in the process of this, we have had lawyers involved. We have been to the township and said, can you please, we've had people putting their Sea-Doos, boats, their private docks, even though they're not landowners, in front of our private property. We've come to the town. You would do nothing to remove those for us. We went to the municipal M&R. They didn't have the manpower to send anyone down. They said, sorry, we don't have a budget for people to enforce this, for the removal of those docks and boats and Sea-Doos. I've been paying my taxes for 45 years, and they're not cheap, and yet I have to put up with sometimes a dozen people sitting on docks in front of my private property. And I could get not Transport Canada, I could not get Lake Simcoe Conservation, anyone to enforce the removal of those items in front of my private property. I want to know if someone here is going to be, if this all goes through, are you going to enforce the removal of these things from people that are not waterfront like owners in front of people's private property that I'm paying taxes? Because right now I don't see anybody enforcing that. And it's been a nightmare for us. Absolute nightmare. I think that's all. If there's anything else, I will let Michelle know. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I noticed Mr. Kane and Michelle writing vigorously over there, so I'm sure they're making lots of notes. Anyone else that would like to come up and make comments? And I will ask again, anyone else that wants to come forward and make comments? And third time, anyone that wishes to come forward and make comments? Please, sir. Whenever you're ready.
My name's Chris McCready, 857 Adams Road, L9S4C9. Excuse me, this is a first-time caller here, but since I came, I'd like to just talk. I have a dock, a lift, a marine rail, a boat slip, and a boathouse with an apartment on top. Everything that you are dictating what they're proposing changes to, I have. I'm just wondering, am I going to have to pay a permit for all those now? Are we going down that road that I'm going to need a permit for all those things? And also, you're trying to dictate what I can put in that building as well, as far as power source, whirlpools, no potable water. I already have all those things in there. I'm just wondering, will I need to remove those things? And also, most of the damage to the lake that I see, I've been up there for 15 years, happens from non-waterfront owners or people that don't live on the water. It's from other people using the water. I just want to say I paid a premium for the property. I paid a huge premium in taxes, a massive premium in taxes. And I did notice when we did a showing of hands that nobody on this side of the room owned any waterfront property. I'd just like to echo what some of the other previous speakers have said is, could we please slow down and rethink this and get all your ducks in a row before we go further? Because it appears that we're pushing this ahead a little sooner without proper consultation with the proper people, mainly waterfront owners. I know there's been a lot of interaction in the community, but I just would like to echo again, could we slow it down a bit and before we put anything into law or bylaw? Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And I'll ask one final time, is there anyone else that would like to come forward and make a comment? Yes, sir, in the back row. Please state your name and address and postal code.
My name is Daryl Hayward. I don't own any property in Innisfil at all. My main concern here is the health of the lake. I'm an avid outdoorsman, like a lot of people here. I know there's a lot of problems going on with the lake. I have a few things noted here. These overwater boathouses are going to screw up our habitat, fisheries, stocking, all the work that's been going so well by the people. I think I'm going to speak to the gentleman that spoke earlier because he's more up my line of work. So over here. My main concern is the health of the lake, the fishery, and I've been seeing it go down, and I just think we better have a look at that a little more importantly than squabbling over docks and boathouses and things like that. But yes, people that have spent the money in taxes for their view of the lake, it's very important to everybody. I'm sure the council will deal with that accordingly, but the mainstay is the health of the lake, as was said earlier, and I'll just leave it at that. But that's my main concern for coming today. There's an act for that, the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, and if we follow that, we'll all see that we're not allowed to put things in the lake. We're not allowed to build on the lake. We're not allowed to change the shorefront. Basically, every bylaw that they're trying to change here goes against that section 28, all of it. There should be no building on the lake. Staying back from the lake, fine. Homes on the lake with a reasonable distance, yes. Other than that, no building on the lake. None. You're taking away from the lake. You want a big boat, go somewhere else. Go down to the ocean. Half of the people on the lake stay there half of the year anyway. Anyways, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Oh, you have two other gentlemen at the back of the room. First of all, we're going to have the gentleman without Mr. Geist, and then Mr. Marvin, you can come up after. Whenever you're ready, sir.
John Vanderwoord, 425 Limerick Street, LOL 1KO. From what I have seen, I would recommend that the committee move forward with permanent structure regulation. As a resident, I would love to see permanent structures regulated. The seasonal docks, the things that go out for a couple of months, I'm not sure that I would like that regulated, because that seems to be a lot of red tape, have the standards and handle exceptions, but the regulation of a temporary item that goes in and out and doesn't really cause, as we've heard before, permanent damage to the lake. I'm not sure. I don't believe that needs to be necessarily permitted.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Geist.
Very briefly, Your Worship, a number of years ago, before everyone's time here but mine, Council approved a bylaw which related to the lake. And as a matter of fact, it pertained to the use of your cottage, and you couldn't use it during the summer months, or the winter months, pardon me. And that public meeting occurred on a religious holiday. And at that time, I told Council that you ought not to have had a meeting on that day, which governed so much of the shoreline. And from that day onward, Council always asked me for a calendar with regard to specific holidays. And they have always followed that. Now, I've received calls from people that have said there's a perception of distrust with Council, that there is a lack of transparency with Council, there is a lack of credibility with Council, because you are undergoing a process that affects 1,295 shoreline people. And I want this process to be inclusionary. And I would ask that this matter be put down to a later date when everyone involved has an opportunity to speak to this matter. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. The lady at the back of the room. Your name, address, and postal code, please.
Natasha Valliere, 2781 25th Side Road, L9S3T1, I believe. I don't live on the lakeshore or anything like that. I don't even really go swimming that much, but I care a lot about the environment. I'm here to represent the environment, and I care a lot about Lake Simcoe as I've grown up on it. I know that we have a lot of strategies in place that will reduce the phosphorus loadings into Lake Simcoe and stuff like that, and I don't believe that this bylaw will help that in any way whatsoever. I don't think that building large impermeable surfaces over the lake will help reduce any phosphorus. I don't think that creating areas that have low dissolved oxygen will help the lake in any way whatsoever. And the lake gives us many resources, and all it asks in return is for us to protect it. And this is not a good way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll ask one final time. Then we'll go to council. Is there anyone else that would like to make comments? Seeing or hearing none? Oops. No, there's a gentleman at the back first, ma'am. The gentleman at the back. State your name and address and postal code, please. And whenever you're ready, please remove your hat too, please.
My name is Giuseppe Dominic Gigliotti, and my address is 386 Lackley Street, Orillia, Ontario, L3V 4P4. This is my first time coming to council, so thank you very much for allowing the public to voice their opinion. I'm a designated environmental professional with Eco Canada. I'm a graduate from Georgian College Environmental Engineering Technology program, and soon I will earn my accreditation as an environmental engineer from the University of Cape Breton. I've completed several co-ops with the Ontario Ministry of Environment. I actually worked for the Great Lakes Monitoring Unit, and I spent the past summer, working in Georgian Bay, the St. Clair River, and Lake Simcoe. I currently work for Mount McClimmon Co-op, which is probably a place that a lot of you like. I like it too. You all like it because we all connect and resonate deeply with the environment. There's a distinction to be made, that can be made, between someone who is a designated and labeled tree hugger, and there's a distinction between someone who works hard for their family to provide recreational fun, etc. I understand both spectrums completely. Part of my family is wealthy, and part of my family is not. But that doesn't mean we don't share the same values. So I do agree that everyone has a right to build what they worked for, to provide a dock, to provide a boat, to go jet skiing. We all love those things one time or another. And those things are great in moderation. But so is canoeing, quiet mornings, quiet evenings, and just like the laughter of your kids and cousins around the fire. So the lake brings us all together. So if something's over-engineered, you disturb the peace of others. It's such a gray area. Where is the line drawn in the sand? But that's why we have designated engineers, designated scientists, different levels of government, and professionals that come together in a board to try to make the right decision for the community as a whole. So it's not really fair to say one person can't have one thing and one person can't have another. But the idea is that we work together to find the balance so we can all enjoy what we love in moderation and respect for each other. So please, I implore you, to do your due diligence as the professional you are and the trusted power that you have is not abused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. Ma'am, you wanted to make another comment.
Yes, something I forgot. Since we're all very interested in the health of the lake, I just want to also mention that I think we should have been considering the few streets that did not have sewers and water put on them, mine being one, Houston Avenue. Every property along there and it's low-lying, quite a few of them to the lake, is reliant on a septic system. We were the only street many, many years ago when you decided to put sewers and water through. You neglected to do our street when the price was extremely reasonable and we had tons of funding from upper government. It would have cost us next to nothing. Then, of course, when you decided to look into it and asked all the neighbors, the price had gone up so high that everybody said, I don't want to pay that much money for it. But if we're really concerned about the lake, then you should be revisiting that and getting waters and sewers down Houston Avenue to all those properties, which now, at the time you thought, oh, they're all just seasonal, they're there for a few months, it's no big deal. Most of them are now turning into permanent residential properties, and they're paying a fortune for these new septic systems, which you're making people put in, and really should have been hammering through to get sewers and water down there and get that road widened to a proper width, whether you have to expropriate property or whatever. Very difficult to drive down that road at times. Thank you.
Ma'am, I couldn't agree more. We'd love to put water and sewer down there, but unfortunately the province doesn't see that way, and neither does the federal government to look at giving us monies to help us do those situations. I know they granted some money a few years ago, but it wasn't enough to even cover a small percentage of what we were asking the residents to pay down there. So I would suggest you certainly talk to your provincial members of parliament and your federal members of parliament because the lake is very important, and we can't put it on the taxpayers to pay for everything. It's we get about 9 cents of every dollar that's collected by the taxes. So, I mean, the provincial and federal governments get a lot of money. I would suggest that we certainly go after them to rectify the problems for some of the residents of this town. Is there anyone else that would like to make comments? Okay, so we'll turn it over to council. Council members, questions, comments? First of all, Councillor Nicol, and then Councillor Doug Lougheed.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of quick things before I sit back. Obviously, you've gone through 105 pages. I have many questions myself with this document as well. It was asked by one of the residents if any of us here were waterfront residents. With that, not realizing or not thinking that legally I could have a pecuniary interest. I may actually do have one because I do back onto Contiki Marina. I'm also the president of the Shore Acres Beach Association. For that, I'm going to disclose that pecuniary interest and seek legal independent advice before speaking to anything else on this. So I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Thank you, Councillor. Then Councillor Lougheed, please.
Thank you, Worship. And in the interest of time, I've got some, I think it's 3 questions and a general and a comment. And I know that Mr. Kane and Ms. Banfield and staff, as they do with all of the staff reports and public meetings, they do a very detailed review of the questions and come back with I think pretty well a response, if not to all, to 99% of the. So I expect that there's going to be a staff report back in probably longer than maybe they had anticipated because of the amount of comment tonight. So I'm just going to throw a few things out here in terms of questions. So the first question, and I don't expect an answer tonight, I expect it to be dealt with in the thing. Ms. Banfield talked about the fact that the community permitting system went through the stages and had no avenue of appeal. However, I think that's probably correct in terms of the community planning permit, but there is nothing to prevent somebody from going an end around in terms of an official plan amendment, a zoning application, and those type of things that might ultimately be approved by council or turned down by council, and that in effect is appealable, I think. So I want you to deal with that because I think I don't want the impression out there that the community planning permit is not appealable. There are other avenues around it, and I think recently some OMB reform restrictions in terms of actually who can appeal that type of stuff. So that was the first thing. The second thing is the question of we've heard a couple of times tonight about the interim control bylaw, and I guess the question is that I would like addressed is what happens if that interim control bylaw expires, but is not replaced by the shoreline bylaw or something else. What's the process that happens during that intermediate period when the expiry of the interim control and the enactment of something else to replace it? Where does the authorities lie and all that kind of stuff? So that's the second question. The third question is we've heard about health of the lake. So I know that our Innisfil Planning Department is, and quite frankly, they do a great job. I think, has been said tonight, they've gone above and beyond in this report, and it's certainly evolved some discussion. But the Planning Department deals with Planning Act issues, and other departments such as the LSRCA, the legislation of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, M&R, potentially fishery, the tree that Michelle had up there, deal with health of the lake issues. And even though you've talked about it, I think there needs to be a really comprehensive articulation of how, when a community permit, those agencies come to play, because primarily our responsibility as the municipality is not, we're concerned about the health of the lake, but we've got other commenters that basically deal with more health of lake issues. And I guess my final comment is, and it may to some extent be have solved itself to some extent in the sense of timing, and that's been addressed several times tonight. And the issue of snowbirds, people on the lake that aren't here. Although this has been a year and a bit long process, as the lady in the front row that talked, this is the first time she's heard about something, and I'm not sure why, because it was advertised well, it was done, but it was the direct mailing that did that. My guess is, or my assumption is, given the feedback from the public tonight, that's going to take a considerable amount of time and probably take up much of the time that Mr. Geese talked about to the May 24th anyways. But I think it's appropriate that there be the ability for people to comment and make at least final submissions to council sometime in the area when it's in the cottage season or in the seasonal season, if you want to call it that. Those are my only comments.
Next, Councillor Deputy Mayor Dolan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight. It's really nice to have an audience for a change. Usually there's us and Mr. Lindsay, and that's about it in the whole room, other than staff, of course. So thank you, and thanks for anybody who was online, and I hope that worked out, and thanks for staff for making that happen. I'm going to keep this really short because, obviously we're running a bit late now, and we've got people who are here for our council meeting, which started 20 minutes ago, so we apologize to them. And to let everybody know, if they are interested in hearing further debate, to make sure that they do sign the sheet on the way out so they can be notified when their report comes forward. I really want to thank Michelle for the work that's gone into this. I spent an afternoon with her last June, so June of 2016, at the Family Fun Day here, talking with residents. So this is a process that has been going on for some time. And you can see that there are different sides to this issue. And if you listen carefully, you could hear that there are more than one side. And for all of the people who came to me and said, why are you guys doing this? Now you can see why. You can see the neighborhood issues that every one of us who have shoreline in our wards, or certainly the mayor and I as well, we get the calls about the issues and the contention. The shoreline is finite and it is valuable, and we need to find that place that I think it was described so eloquently by one of the last gentlemen there: moderation and respect for each other. If that happened and we can find that spot, we wouldn't have to regulate everything. But the issue is it does happen, there are issues, there's easements and so on, and the shoreline isn't straight. If the shoreline was perfectly straight, everybody could have a dock out, it wouldn't impede on anyone else. But the trouble is, when you put your dock out and it covers your neighbor's front shoreline, these things are happening, and we're the front line, and we're the ones that are requested to deal with that. So we're trying to do what's right for the environment, do what's right for your neighbor, do what's right for you as a private property owner, and for all the residents. So with that, I'll just thank you again. It was a really healthy debate and much appreciated.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I will ask, are there any other further questions of Council? Councillor Lougheed and Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Worship. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, but I especially want to thank Tim and Michelle. We are the only municipality on the lake to do this to date and at least take a stab at it, which is far beyond what the rest of Lake Simcoe is doing right now as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to leave everybody here with a quote. The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. That's from Albert Einstein, quote from Albert Einstein. We're actually doing something here in the town. There's a lot of individuals here that think that we're looking at putting on more laws and more restrictions for individuals, but really what we want to do is we want to preserve and help the health of Lake Simcoe. So this is what it's about. There's more questions that need to be answered. There's possibly some things that need to be tweaked a little in the R shores, but I think it's a good start. And I'm impressed of the individuals that are here, and I know going forward it will be the right thing for the lake.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Dario.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I have been really educated tonight. I really appreciate the input we've got. I like the emails, the telephone calls, but tonight was wonderful because we're dealing with a very difficult issue, and what I heard was respectful and thoughtful, and it will certainly help me in helping with some of the decisions that have to be made in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay. If you have not made oral or written submissions in regard to this proposal before a decision is reached, you should be aware that the Ontario Municipal Board may dismiss your appeal. Anyone wishing to be contacted about when this matter will be considered by Council is asked to fill out the notification form located by the entranceway to the Council chambers, and it's just to my left on the way out, and it's not the pink form that says open forum, it's the other one. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight and expressing your concerns. I appreciate Michelle and Mr. Tim Kane for the great job that they did tonight and presented by the town.